Hello, everybody. Hello. So this is a very relaxed speech, so I hope you're all feeling quite relaxed about it. It's just a wander through my own thoughts. Pretty easy. Oh, by the way, I think Ben and I read some of the same articles, so there may be some overlap. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, as I've no doubt you're aware, there has been an explosion in the availability and use of shared services over the past few years, and that encompasses everything from accommodation to cars to bikes to driveways to lawnmowers to surfboards. For many of us, it has changed the way we experience other countries and other cultures through services such as Airbnb or Couchsurfer, or the way we travel in our daily lives through services such as Uber. Where in the past you might have had to book a taxi hours or even days in advance, or try desperately to flag one down at 2 in the morning, now you can summon someone at the click of a button. Where travel in the past might have meant a featureless hotel or a charmless self-catering apartment, you can now choose to live like a local, as Airbnb has it. So the sharing economy has already changed the way many of us live in various ways. And I thought it might be interesting to explore this phenomenon a little, what it can mean for those who use it, what motivates people to offer and use these services, and what the strengths and limits or limitations of the sharing economy might be. I wanted to talk about the sharing economy today because it's something that's quite close to my heart for various reasons. The commercial aspect aside, I think as a concept, it's pretty great really. People sharing what they have with others who need it. A few years ago, I couch-surfed in Spain and spent a few weeks living with someone who looked very similar to Jesus and whose house seemed to be permanently filled with travelling waifs and strays. It was an eye-opening experience in living with strangers and in being open to what they can teach you and what you can teach them in return. In Brussels, I spent the majority of my year on the Commission's Newcomers Scheme living with a Belgian family that I found on Airbnb because I was commuting between Brussels and the UK. For me, the flexibility that arrangement offered was invaluable. In addition, and perhaps more importantly, living with a family offered a sense of support and structure that I don't think I would have had if I had stayed in a hotel or if I had rented a room. We ate dinner together, we'd share a bottle of wine in the evenings, they recommended places to go in the city in my free time, and they offered encouragement and guidance on days when the meetings were challenging and maybe when my beginner's confidence was wobbling. I appreciate, of course, that not all Airbnb bookings are like this. I have also stayed with some seriously strange people through Airbnb, but for me, that experience is what the sharing economy should mean. So placing your trust in strangers and being open and generous with your time and with your energy. So what motivates people to use Airbnb and sites like Airbnb and the sharing economy more widely? The most obvious answer, of course, is the money. The sharing economy is huge, and the ethos could be summarized as what's mine is yours for a fee. The consumer peer-to-peer rental market is said to be worth some $26 billion. Airbnb data shows that hosts in San Francisco rent their rooms out for 58 nights a year on average and make an average of $9,300 from that. Uber is doubling its revenue every 6 months. Owners make money from underused assets, and renters or guests spend less than they would if they use traditional providers or if they bought the items themselves. There is also the sociability factor with peer-to-peer accommodation, which I have already mentioned. In addition, peer-to-peer markets can offer greater flexibility, both for providers and for users. And lastly, there are the environmental benefits. For example, renting a car when you need it rather than buying a car that you rarely use means that fewer cars are required and that fewer resources are needed for making them. This also ties into a cultural shift in recent years, which has been gaining ground, whereby less is more, and there's a growing desire to own no more than what you really need. So to a degree, the motivating factors for individuals mirror the advantages that the sharing economy offers to individuals. So greater flexibility, convenience, a money-making or a money-saving opportunity. But what advantages does the sharing economy offer on a broader scale, so a more global scale? First of all, it creates or it helps to create new services. So there is growing demand for short-term accommodation rentals or ride sharing that cannot easily be met by traditional providers, and that's usually due to the level of capital investment required. So take Uber, for example, and the success of Uber rests on the ubiquity of its services. It requires a huge fleet of cars and drivers, and that would be prohibitively expensive if Uber had to provide all of its cars and employ all of its drivers. So in other words, if Uber were to use a different model, Uber most likely would not exist. Second, it provides employment flexibility. Where full-time or traditional employment comes with all the attendant obligations and restrictions as par for the course, freelancers can usually work where they choose, set their own hours, go on holiday when it suits them, and use their time in the way that is most convenient for them. Now, this demand for flexibility is becoming a feature of the wider workforce. In addition, freelancing for companies like Uber can be a lifeline for people who lack the credentials or the qualifications to do more skilled jobs. Third, it provides a welcome challenge, or welcome in my opinion, to the hegemony of established traditional providers, so the big hotels, things like that. And it is true that the major sharing economy platforms, such as Airbnb and Uber, have been met with quite a lot of resistance in certain sectors. And in Paris, for example, last year, 3,000 taxi drivers blocked many of the main roads and set tyres on fire in protest at the presence of Uber in the city. And similarly, Airbnb hosts have been fined for contravening city hotel laws. That brings us to the main issue of the limits that may face the sharing economy. And the main limiting factor would be legislation. The question is, should standard legislation be applied to sharing economy providers? To give an example, which I quite like, it's quite visual. So food establishments are usually required to install a sneeze guard on the food that they have. In their cafe, for example, the food that's on display for hygiene reasons. Now that requirement doesn't apply to things such as a school fete or a church fete because it's a one-off, it's informal, it's a temporary establishment, if you like. So which rules would apply to pop-up restaurants, for example? They're not established, but they are still serving the public. Should there be a sliding scale for regulations? It's all still very much a grey area. And harsher regulations could do serious harm to the development of peer-to-peer markets, and they could also put the brakes on innovation. Alternatively, some have argued that the legislation that is currently applied to traditional providers should be scrapped, and that would place the traditional economies and the sharing economy on a more level playing field. However, some have countered that by saying that that could pose a real threat to workers' rights, which under the sharing economy are afforded little to no protection. Freelancers, as many of you will know, have no job security, no pensions, no sick leave, no benefits at all, save greater flexibility and greater autonomy. So you can ask the question as to whether that's really a fair trade-off. So by way of a slightly incorrect conclusion, ultimately, you could argue that the sharing economy gives greater power to the consumer, to the little guy. And the question is how we as consumers would choose to exercise that power. And I think that what we need to do is ensure that we use that in a way that doesn't exploit the vulnerability of sharing economy workers. Thank you.